Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. In every town, there are people who are trusted more than others. A doctor is one of them. People believe that a doctor will heal them, comfort them, and protect them. They open their doors to the doctor, share their secrets, and place their lives in his hands. In the town of Hyde, near Manchester in England, there was one doctor who seemed to carry this trust perfectly. His name was Harold Shipman. He wore glasses, spoke calmly, and always looked professional. Patients liked him. Families respected him. To the outside world, he was a man of honor, a family man, and a kind doctor. But behind this image was a truth so dark that it shocked the whole nation. Harold Shipman was not only a doctor. He was also a killer, one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. For years, he ended the lives of the very people who trusted him most. He did it quietly, without violence, using the power of medicine itself. This is the story of Harold Shipman, the doctor with a dark secret. A story of trust, betrayal, and the hidden evil that lived behind a friendly face. Harold Shipman was born in Nottingham, England, in January 1946. He grew up in a simple home with his parents and his siblings. From a young age, people noticed that Harold was quiet and serious. He was not the kind of boy who liked to play too much with others. Instead, he often kept to himself. His mother, Vera, was the most important person in his life. She cared for him deeply, and he admired her. Harold often sat by her side listening to her words, and he trusted her more than anyone else. She encouraged him to work hard in school, and she believed he could become someone important. But when Harold was still a teenager, something happened that changed him forever. His mother became very ill. She had cancer, and her health quickly became worse. Harold watched as his strong mother grew weaker day by day. It was painful for him to see, but it was also something that shaped his future. Doctors came to visit Vera. They gave her injections of morphine to ease her pain. Harold noticed how the medicine calmed her, how it made her quiet and peaceful even as her illness got worse. The image of those injections stayed in his mind. He saw how a simple drug could control life and death. In 1963, when Harold was just 17, his mother died. Her death left him heartbroken. He felt lost without her. Many believed that this experience with his mother's illness and the use of morphine played a big role in the man he would later become. After his mother's death, Harold decided to study medicine. He wanted to become a doctor. Perhaps he wanted to honor his mother, or perhaps he wanted to have the same power he saw the doctors had. Whatever his reasons, he worked hard to make this dream real. He studied at Leeds School of Medicine and graduated in 1970. Soon after, he began working as a doctor. At first, people saw him as dedicated and intelligent. He was young, ambitious, and wanted to build his career. But even in those early years, there were signs of something strange about Harold. He worked at Pontefract General Infirmary and then later became a general practitioner in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. He married a woman named Primrose, and together they had children. To outsiders, Harold seemed like a normal family man. However, Harold had a secret. He had developed an addiction to painkillers, especially pethidine, a strong drug. He began writing false prescriptions so he could use the drug himself. In 1975, he was caught. He was fined, and for a time he had to leave his job. Still, Harold managed to continue his career. Many people thought he had learned his lesson, but the truth was different. He still carried within him a dangerous interest in drugs, death, and control. By 1977, Shipman moved to Hyde, a small town near Manchester, and began working as a family doctor. He built a strong reputation in the community. Patients trusted him. They thought he was kind and reliable. He would visit sick people at their homes, check on the elderly, and show care in a way that made him popular. What no one knew was that Shipman was slowly building a double life. Behind his professional smile, he was hiding a dark secret. At first, the deaths around him did not cause alarm. After all, he treated many elderly patients, and death was a natural part of life. But something about these deaths was unusual. Many of them happened suddenly, often right after Harold had visited. Some patients were found sitting peacefully in their chairs, as if death had come gently in the middle of the day. Undertakers in the town began to notice. They saw that many of the bodies they collected were Shipman's patients. It was strange, but no one had proof of wrongdoing. After all, doctors were respected figures. They were trusted without question. For years, Harold continued like this. He appeared to be a good doctor, a family man, and a respected member of the community. But behind closed doors, he was experimenting. He used morphine, the same drug he had seen given to his mother, to end lives. His patients never knew what was happening. They believed they were in safe hands. As time passed, the number of deaths around Shipman grew. Families mourned their loved ones, but they accepted the doctor's word that the deaths were natural. After all, who would doubt the word of a doctor? The small town of Hyde trusted him completely. Old women welcomed him into their homes. Families called him when their parents were sick. Everyone believed that Dr. Shipman was a man of honor. But slowly, the truth was beginning to surface. Some people started to ask questions. Why did so many of his patients die at home? And why did so many of them die sitting up in a chair? Why were there so few post-mortem examinations? Why did he often insist that cremation was the best option? The answers were not yet clear, but a storm was coming. In the late 1990s, suspicions about Harold Shipman grew stronger. Local doctors began to compare notes and realized that Shipman had far more deaths than anyone else. Funeral directors whispered about it too. Still, no one wanted to believe it could be true. Then came the case that would finally expose him. The death of Kathleen Grundy, a wealthy and respected woman in the community. She died suddenly in 1998. Shipman claimed it was natural, just old age. But soon after her death, something suspicious was found. A will that left almost all of her money to Shipman. This was the mistake that would bring his dark secret into the light. After Kathleen Grundy died, many people in Hyde felt sad. She had been a well-known woman, kind and respected. She was 81 years old, still active, and still involved in her community. Her sudden death surprised her family, but they trusted Dr. Shipman when he said it was natural. He told them there was no need for questions, but soon after, Kathleen's daughter, Angela, made a discovery that changed everything. She found a will among her mother's papers. The will looked unusual. It said that almost all of Kathleen's money and belongings should go to Harold Shipman. It also said her family should receive almost nothing. Angela knew this was not right. Her mother loved her family deeply and would never write a will like that. She took the document to the police. At first, the police were not sure. Could it be possible that the trusted local doctor was lying? But the will looked false. The writing was clumsy, and the signature did not look real. The police decided to investigate. They asked for Kathleen's body to be examined. When doctors carried out tests, they found something shocking. Her body contained high levels of diamorphine, a strong form of morphine. It was clear that she had not died naturally. She had been poisoned. Now the police had serious concerns about Harold Shipman. If he could do this to Kathleen, could he have done the same to others? They began to look at the deaths of many of his patients. They saw a pattern, sudden deaths, often at home with Shipman always present. In September 1998, the police arrested him. The quiet doctor, who had been trusted by so many, was now suspected of being a killer. The people of Hyde were shocked. Some refused to believe it. Others began to wonder if their loved ones had been victims too. The investigation grew larger. Police searched Shipman's home and office. They found typewriters, which he had used to create false documents, including the fake will. They also looked at medical records. Many of them had been changed. Shipman had written false notes to make it seem like his patients were sick, even when they were not. This helped him hide the truth when they died. Families were called in to talk about their loved ones who had died under his care. Again and again, they told similar stories. Their mother, father, or grandmother had been healthy, or only a little ill, when suddenly Dr. Shipman said they had died of natural causes. Often he discouraged them from asking for a post-mortem. Sometimes he even suggested cremation quickly. The truth was frightening. Slowly, the police and doctors realized they were not dealing with just one suspicious death, but with many. It seemed that Shipman had been killing patients for years. By 1999, he was charged with 15 murders, including Kathleen Grundy. He was also charged with forging her will. The case went to trial in January 2000. The trial shocked the whole country. People who had once trusted their doctor now listened to stories of betrayal. Families sat in court and heard how their loved ones had been poisoned by the very man they had turned to for help. Prosecutors explained how Shipman had killed. He used lethal injections of diamorphine. He would visit patients at home or in his surgery, give them the drug, and watch as their life faded away. Then he would write in his records that the death was natural. Sometimes he claimed the patient had heart problems or other illnesses. Even when there was no evidence, witness after witness came forward. They spoke of relatives who had been fine one day and gone the next. They remembered how Shipman was always calm, always ready with explanations, always convincing. His charm had fooled everyone. In court, Shipman sat quietly. He denied everything. He said he was innocent, that he had done nothing wrong. But the evidence was strong. There were medical records, forged documents, and the results of tests showing diamorphine in the bodies of his patients. The fake will in Kathleen Grundy's case made it even clearer. After months of hearings, the jury reached their decision. In January 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 murders and 1 charge of forgery. He was sentenced to life in prison. The judge said he should never be released. But even after the trial, questions remained. Had he killed only 15 people? Or were there more? Investigators believed the true number was much higher. Some said he may have killed more than 200 patients. Others thought the number could be close to 250. The community of Hyde was left in pain. Families wondered if their mothers, fathers, and grandparents had been victims. Funerals that had once seemed peaceful now felt suspicious. Many people lived with regret, asking themselves if they should have questioned the doctor sooner. Across Britain, people were horrified. How could this happen? How could one man kill so many and not be caught for so long? The government began an inquiry to find answers. This became known as the Shipman Inquiry. The inquiry was led by Dame Janet Smith. She listened to evidence from families, doctors, nurses, and police officers. She studied records and looked at hundreds of deaths. Slowly, a picture emerged of how Shipman had operated in secret for years. He had chosen his victims carefully, usually elderly women who trusted him. He had given them lethal doses of drugs, then written false notes to cover it up. Because of his position as a doctor, nobody suspected him. The inquiry revealed failures, too. Other doctors had noticed unusual things like the high number of deaths, but their concerns had not been followed strongly enough. Systems for checking deaths were weak. There was too much trust in doctors and not enough checks on their work. The case of Harold Shipman changed medicine in Britain forever. New rules were introduced. Doctors had to follow stricter processes when recording deaths. Prescriptions of strong drugs were monitored more carefully. The government wanted to make sure nothing like this could happen again. But for the families of Shipman's victims, no new rule could heal their pain. They had lost loved ones, often in the most cruel way, not from illness, but from the hand of the man they trusted most. Shipman stayed in prison, silent and cold. He never admitted his crimes. He never explained why he killed. Some thought he enjoyed control. Some thought he believed he was helping his patients by ending their lives. Others believed he killed simply because he could. No one knew for sure, because Harold Shipman kept his secret locked inside. Harold Shipman began his life in prison in the year 2000. He was no longer the respected doctor of Hyde. He was now known as a murderer, a man who had betrayed the very people he was meant to protect. Guards watched him closely. Other prisoners whispered about him. Some hated him, while others were curious about the quiet doctor who had killed so many. Shipman himself stayed calm. He did not speak much. He never admitted to his crimes, and he never explained why he did what he did. Even when asked by prison officers or officials, he denied everything. He carried himself with the same cold expression he had shown in court. At first, he spent his time in solitary areas for his own safety. Later, he was moved to Wakefield Prison, a high-security prison in England. Life inside was strict. There were routines, rules, and constant surveillance. But even there, Shipman seemed detached, as though the world around him no longer mattered. He had been given a life sentence, with no chance of ever being released. The judge had made it clear that society could never trust him again. Shipman would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For many, this was justice. For others, it still felt incomplete. Outside the prison walls, people continued to search for answers. Families wanted to know the truth. How many had he really killed? Why had he done it? What had driven a doctor, a man of knowledge and training, to turn into one of history's most prolific killers? But Shipman refused to help. He kept his silence. Each day that passed was another day without answers. The Shipman inquiry, which continued for years, estimated that he had killed at least 215 people and possibly more. Yet without his confession, the exact number would never be known. Some believed that he enjoyed playing God. By giving his patients lethal injections, he decided who lived and who died. Others thought he killed because of his past, because of the trauma of watching his mother die when he was a teenager. They suggested that seeing morphine calm his mother's pain had left a deep mark on him. Perhaps he thought he was relieving suffering, even when the patients were not near death, but many doubted this idea. They pointed out that Shipman often killed people who were not in pain, not close to death, and still enjoying their lives. They said his crimes were not mercy, but cruelty. In prison, Shipman's wife, Primrose, visited him. She had stood by him during the trial, even when the evidence was overwhelming. She remained loyal, though many could not understand why. She spoke to him, wrote to him, and tried to support him. For her, life had been destroyed, too. Her husband was a killer, her family's name was ruined, and yet she could not let go. The years passed slowly. Shipman never changed his story. He never admitted to being guilty. This frustrated investigators, families, and the public. Some still hoped that one day he would speak, that he would reveal his secrets, that he would finally say why. But in January 2004, something happened that ended all hope of answers. On the morning of January 13th, prison guards found Harold Shipman hanging in his cell. He had used bed sheets tied to the window bars. He was dead one day before his 58th birthday. News of his death spread quickly. Some felt relief. They believed justice was finally complete. The man who had taken so many lives was gone. Others were angry. They thought he had escaped true punishment. They wanted him to live long in prison, to feel the weight of his crimes every day. Instead, he had chosen to end his own life. For the families of victims, his suicide was especially painful. Many had hoped he would eventually confess. They had hoped for closure, for final answers, for some understanding of why their loved ones had been taken. With his death, those answers disappeared forever. Shipman had carried his dark secret to the grave. After his suicide, debates began. Some asked why the prison had allowed him the chance to take his own life. Should he have been watched more closely? Was it a failure of the system again, just as the medical system had failed to stop him before? Others wondered about his reasons. Did he feel guilt at last? Did he want to escape the shame of his name being forever linked with murder? Or did he simply want to keep control, even at the end, by deciding the time and manner of his own death? No one knew. The government continued to study the case. The Shipman inquiry released its final reports, showing the scale of his crimes and the weaknesses in the system that had allowed him to continue for so long. Doctors now had to be more careful with records, prescriptions, and death certificates. Patient safety became a much greater focus. But despite these changes, the shadow of Harold Shipman still hung over Britain. His name became a symbol of betrayal. People who once trusted doctors without question now felt fear. They wondered, could another Shipman exist? Could someone else be hiding behind the mask of care and kindness? Years later, his house in Hyde stood empty, a reminder of the man who had lived there and taken so many lives. People avoided it. They whispered as they passed. The home of the friendly doctor had become a place of horror. Shipman's story was told in books, television shows, and documentaries. He was studied by psychologists, criminologists, and students of medicine. His crimes became one of the darkest chapters in British history. Yet through it all, one truth remained. Harold Shipman never explained himself. He left behind no letter, no confession, no reason. His silence made the pain even worse. Families were left with questions that could never be answered. For the people of Hyde, the memory never faded. The streets where Shipman walked, the clinic where he worked, the houses he visited, all carried the weight of what had happened. Trust had been broken in a way that could never be fully repaired, and so Harold Shipman's story ended not with justice, not with truth, but with silence. He had taken the lives of hundreds, and in the end, he had taken his own, leaving the world to wonder forever about the darkness that lived inside him. After Harold Shipman's death in 2004, the world was left with questions. The crimes were so shocking, so unusual that people could not stop talking about them. How had one man managed to kill so many patients without being caught? How had the system failed again and again? And most importantly, how could society make sure that this never happened again? The British government decided that a full and detailed investigation was needed. This became known as the Shipman Inquiry. It was led by Dame Janet Smith, a respected judge. Her task was not only to count how many people Shipman had killed, but also to study how he had been able to do it for so long without anyone stopping him. The inquiry lasted for several years. It was one of the largest investigations ever carried out in Britain. Thousands of documents were studied. Families gave evidence. Doctors, nurses, and undertakers were called to speak. Each story added more detail to the picture of what had happened. The inquiry discovered that Shipman had probably begun killing soon after he started working as a doctor. This meant his crimes had gone on for decades. The victims were mostly elderly women, but not always. Some were younger, some were men, and many of them were not close to death when they were killed. Shipman's method was always the same. He gave his patients lethal injections of diamorphine. Sometimes he visited them at home. Sometimes they died in his clinic. He always found ways to make it look natural. Afterward, he wrote false notes in their records. He sometimes added illnesses that were never real. This helped him hide his crimes. The inquiry also showed how the system had failed to notice what was happening. There were many warning signs, but they were not followed properly. Other doctors had noticed that Shipman had far too many patients dying under his care. Funeral directors had noticed the same thing. Even in the 1970s, when he was caught writing false prescriptions for himself, the system had been too lenient. He had been punished but not stopped. He was allowed to continue working, and so the deaths continued. Dame Janet Smith's report estimated that Harold Shipman had killed at least 215 patients. The number could be as high as 250 or even more. This made him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. The scale of his crimes was almost impossible to believe. The report also said that Shipman killed for reasons that were not clear. Some experts thought he wanted power and control. Others believed he wanted to play the role of God, deciding who should live and who should die. Some thought he enjoyed the act of killing itself. There was no single answer because Shipman never explained. The inquiry did not stop with counting the victims. It also looked at what changes were needed in the medical system. One of the biggest problems was the way deaths were certified. In Britain, doctors had a lot of freedom to say how a person died. If a doctor wrote natural causes, very few questions were asked. Shipman used this freedom to hide his crimes. Because of him, new rules were made. Death certificates became stricter. More than one doctor had to check the cause of death in certain cases. Stronger systems were created to review how often doctors' patients were dying. If one doctor reported many more deaths than others, it would now raise questions. Another area of change was the use of powerful drugs like diamorphine. Before Shipman, doctors could prescribe these drugs with little oversight. Shipman abused this system, using his authority to get the drugs he needed. After the inquiry, new monitoring systems were introduced. Prescriptions for dangerous drugs were checked more carefully, and records had to be clearer. The inquiry also recommended changes in the way doctors were supervised. In the past, there had been too much trust. Doctors were respected figures, and people rarely questioned them. Shipman's crimes showed that blind trust was dangerous. From then on, doctors faced more reviews of their work. Patients were given more information about their care, so they could ask questions and feel more secure. For the families of the victims, these changes were important, but they did not take away the pain. Many families had lived with the belief that their loved ones had died peacefully, naturally. Now they had to live with the truth that they had been murdered. It was a cruel shock, one that could not be undone. The town of Hyde also suffered deeply. This was the place where Shipman had lived, worked, and killed for many years. For the people there, his shadow never truly went away. Every street, every house call, every memory carried a heavy weight. Some families even felt guilt, wondering if they should have questioned him sooner. Others felt anger at the system that had failed to protect them. Beyond Hyde, the entire country felt the effect. Shipman's name became a symbol of betrayal. When people talked about trust, they used him as an example of what happens when trust is broken. The idea that a doctor, someone sworn to save lives, could become a killer was something that shook society to its core. Books, films, and documentaries told his story. Students in medicine and criminology studied his case. He was used as a warning about the dangers of power and authority. His crimes became part of history, a dark lesson that would never be forgotten. But for all the lessons, one thing remained unsolved: the question of why. Shipman had never written a letter of confession. He had never sat down to explain himself. Even in prison, he had stayed silent. Some people thought he killed himself to keep control until the end, to leave behind nothing but mystery. His silence became one more cruelty, one more wound for the families who wanted answers. In the years after the inquiry, Britain's medical system became stronger. Deaths were checked more carefully, drugs were controlled more closely, and patients had more rights. These changes saved lives, and in that sense, the tragedy brought progress. But no progress could erase the pain left behind by Harold Shipman. He had taken the lives of hundreds, destroyed the trust of thousands, and changed the way a whole nation thought about doctors. His legacy was not of healing, but of fear. His story was a reminder that evil can hide in the most trusted places, and even though the inquiry was over and even though systems had changed, his shadow still lingered. His crimes left a scar on medicine, a scar that would never fully heal. Years passed after Harold Shipman's death, but his name did not fade. In fact, it became more famous, or rather more infamous. People in Britain and around the world continued to speak of him. His story was told in newspapers, books, and television shows. Each time, the same question was asked: how could a doctor, someone trusted to heal, become a man who killed hundreds? In the small town of Hyde, where Shipman had lived and worked, memories remained strong. Families could not forget the knock at the door when Dr. Shipman came to visit. Many remembered how he smiled, how he spoke with calm confidence. They had trusted him with their mothers, fathers, and grandparents. And yet behind that calm face, he had been planning their deaths. For the victims' families, life was never the same. They lived with grief, but also with anger. Some felt guilt, believing they should have questioned Shipman sooner. Others felt betrayed by the system that had allowed him to go unchecked for so long. Every year, anniversaries brought fresh pain. Flowers were placed on graves, tears were shed, and questions returned. Shipman's wife, Primrose, also lived in the shadow of his crimes. She had once been seen as the quiet wife of a respectable doctor. After his arrest, she became the wife of a murderer. Some people pitied her, others judged her harshly. She had stood by him during his trial, still believing in his innocence or perhaps refusing to believe the truth. Her children, too, carried the burden of his name. The story of Harold Shipman also changed the way ordinary people looked at doctors. In the past, a doctor's word was rarely questioned. Patients believed what their doctor told them, and families accepted it without doubt. After Shipman, that trust was shaken. People asked more questions. They wanted second opinions. They were careful when doctors prescribed strong drugs or made decisions about death certificates. For the medical world, Shipman became a case study. Students in universities studied him not only as a criminal, but also as a warning. Psychologists asked how his mind worked. Was he a man shaped by childhood trauma, by watching his mother die in pain? Or was he simply a man who enjoyed power, who enjoyed playing with life and death? There was no clear answer, and that mystery made his story even darker. Some experts said Shipman was different from other killers. Many killers act with anger or with passion. Shipman, however, killed in silence, in calmness, and often without reason. He chose people who trusted him most, people who were vulnerable. He killed them in their own homes, in places where they felt safe. This coldness made him one of the most terrifying figures in criminal history. Even after his death, debates continued. Some argued that his suicide was selfish, one last act of control. By taking his own life, he had avoided living with his punishment. He had also taken away the chance for families to ever hear the truth from him. Others said his death was a kind of justice because he could harm no one anymore. In television and films, his story was told again and again. Sometimes it focused on the investigation, sometimes on the victims, and sometimes on the man himself. Each version left people shocked. Viewers found it hard to understand how an ordinary-looking man, with glasses and a kind smile, could carry such evil inside. In Britain, the reforms that followed his crimes slowly became part of everyday life. Doctors faced stronger rules about prescribing drugs and writing death certificates. Families had more rights to ask questions and to see medical records. Systems were set up to make sure that unusual patterns, like too many deaths under one doctor, would be noticed. These changes saved lives, and they were part of Shipman's legacy too, though born from tragedy. Still, for many people, reforms were not enough. They believed the memory of the victims was the most important thing. Across Hyde and other places where Shipman had worked, people gathered to remember those who had been lost. They told stories of mothers who loved to knit, fathers who enjoyed walking, grandmothers who cared for their grandchildren. These lives were cut short, but their memories lived on in the hearts of their families. Shipman's name remained one of the darkest in history. He was compared to other killers, but often his name stood alone. He was not just a murderer. He was a doctor, someone who should have been the exact opposite of what he became. That contradiction made his story unforgettable. As time went on, younger generations learned about him in schools, books, and documentaries. They learned how trust can be abused and how systems must always be checked. His story became not only about crime, but also about lessons for the future. Even today, his crimes continue to spark fear and disbelief. People still ask, could there be another Shipman hidden somewhere, using trust and authority as a weapon? The hope is that the changes made after his case will prevent this. But the fear remains because history has shown that darkness can hide in unexpected places. For the families of the victims, Harold Shipman will always be remembered not as a doctor, not as a man, but as a thief of lives. He stole mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. He left behind silence instead of answers. He destroyed trust instead of building it. His story ended in a prison cell, but the impact of his crimes lives on. Each year, his name returns in discussions, in studies, in memories. He is remembered not because of greatness, but because of the warning his life represents. The story of Harold Shipman is not just the story of one man. It is also the story of the people he killed, the families he hurt, and the country he shocked. It is the story of how trust was broken and how systems were forced to change. It is a reminder that evil can wear a friendly face, that danger can come in the shape of someone you believe will help you. And so, though he is gone, the story continues. It continues in the sorrow of families, in the reforms of medicine, and in the minds of all who hear his name. Harold Shipman remains the doctor with a dark secret, a secret that turned into one of the greatest betrayals in history. Harold Shipman's story is one of the darkest chapters in history. He was a doctor, a man trusted to heal, but instead he became a man who destroyed lives. He used his position to harm the very people who depended on him most. He left behind hundreds of grieving families, a town filled with sorrow, and a nation that struggled to understand how such evil could hide in plain sight. His crimes changed the way people looked at doctors, changed the rules of medicine, and forced the world to be more careful with trust. But even with new laws and safer systems, the pain of his victims' families will never disappear. Shipman died without answers, taking his secrets with him. We may never know why he killed or what went through his mind. All that remains is the truth of what he did, and the lessons his crimes left behind. Harold Shipman will always be remembered, not for the good he could have done as a doctor, but for the horror he brought as a killer. His story is a reminder that evil can wear a gentle smile, and that even the most trusted hands can sometimes be the most dangerous. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.